Melania Trump warned Jasmine Crockett, live on air, but forgot her mic was still on. What began as a carefully curated discussion on political civility turned into a defining moment in American media, and it started with nothing more than a whisper. It was just past noon when the cameras went live from WNYT's Albany studio. The panel had been framed as bipartisan balanced and above all respectful. The show's producers had branded it a roundtable on modern discourse, but from the moment the panelists arrived, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal segment. Then came the entrance that shifted the air. Melania Trump, still carrying the ceremonial weight of the First Lady title during her husband's hypothetical second term, walked onto the set dressed in a sharply tailored navy coat and cream heels. She said little. A soft good afternoon to the floor manager, a brief nod to the moderator. But her silence wasn't emptiness, it was intention. 3 seats down sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas Young Sharp, and never one to dilute her truth for comfort. Over the past year, she had earned a reputation for cutting through political theater with unvarnished clarity. And though she never named Melania outright in past comments, the subtext had been clear. Crockett believed some figures in power used politeness as a shield against accountability. The set was pristine glass desks, backlit walls, and no studio audience. Just 4 panelists and 1 moderator. Steve Barkley, a broadcast veteran known for his calm tone. As the show began, so did the subtle chess match. Barkley opened with broad strokes. What does political civility mean in 2025? Can we disagree without disdain? Melania leaned forward, slightly answering in clipped elegance. We should speak with purpose, not noise. Jasmine Crockett blinked, slow, deliberate. Sometimes, she replied, noise is the only thing people hear. After being ignored for too long. A quiet ripple ran through viewers. Not a scandal, not yet. But the tone was set. For 20 minutes, the conversation danced between practiced civility and restrained tension. Jasmine delivered rapid-fire insights. Melania countered with poised, almost studied grace. They didn't interrupt, they didn't attack, but neither gave ground. The turning point came not with a shout, but with stillness. During a segment on accountability, Barkley asked, has the White House done enough to cool rising tempers? Melania answered without blinking. I cannot be responsible for how others react to words, only for my own. Jasmine didn't miss a beat, but silence is a reaction too. The set froze for a half second, the kind of pause that hits deeper than argument. Then came the commercial break. Cameras cut, lights dimmed, techs moved in with earpiece adjustments and water bottles. The kind of quiet professionals are used to behind the curtain, and that's when the whisper came. Melania Trump, hands folded in her lap, leaned just a few inches toward her co-panelist. Her voice was low, her accent unmistakable. You should be careful who you call out, she said. Some of us never forget. Unaware her microphone was still transmitting the words, landed with the intimacy of a secret and the resonance of a threat. Jasmine turned toward her, with a gaze not of shock, but calculation. Oh, she said lightly, her expression unreadable. Is that supposed to scare me? What followed was not a confrontation, not even a rebuttal, just a stare. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Unbeknownst to either woman, the studio's backup audio system, normally reserved for sync and quality control, had recorded every syllable. In the control room, junior editor Angela Russo heard the line, rewound, listened again. She wasn't authorized to act, but she saved the clip. 20 seconds long, crisp clear, not rehearsed, not deniable. What she did next unraveled the illusion of silence. She sent the clip subtitled and time-stamped to a friend. Within the hour, it appeared online in the most modern of breaking news formats, a shaky screen recording of a studio monitor. The caption read, Hot Mic. Moment Melania? Trump warns Rep's Jasmine Crockett, some of us never forget. Decide for yourself. The reaction was immediate. Twitter erupted. TikTok spliced it with ominous music and blinking subtitles. Memes poured in, some mocking, some outraged, all captivated. But what made it explode wasn't the line, it was who it was said to. Jasmine Crockett, who had built a brand on unflinching transparency, now found herself in the center of a confrontation that wasn't scripted but felt inevitable. Over 8 million views in 6 hours. CNN looped the whisper in a segment titled The Sound of Civility. Fox News framed it as protective advice. MSNBC brought in linguists to parse the tone, but the story was no longer about tone. It was about power, and the mic had exposed it. And while media platforms debated whether it was a threat, a warning, or a misinterpretation, Jasmine Crockett said nothing until a tweet appeared from her verified account. Some people hide behind quiet voices. I don't. 10 words, no names, no hashtags, no press release. It landed like a lightning bolt. By sunrise, it was no longer just a clip. It was a cultural moment. And Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a panelist. She had become the conversation. As the day broke across America, the clip had become more than viral. It had become symbolic. In Dallas-Fort Worth and beyond, people weren't just watching the video, they were interpreting it, replaying it, reframing it. The phrase "you should be careful who you call out" had been slowed down, analyzed for subtext, and even remixed over protest footage. And in the middle of the media storm was Jasmine Crockett, silent, steady, and undeniably central. Her office's inbox had crashed by morning. Some messages praised her, others warned her, and a few crossed the line into threats. But most weren't from pundits or political operatives. They came from women, from teachers, mothers, nurses, from teenagers who had never watched a congressional panel until now. "You said what I've never been allowed to say," one message read. "My daughter printed your tweet and taped it to her mirror," another said. "Thank you for not shrinking." And while Crockett remained off camera, her team was working overtime. Inside a dimly lit communications office in Arlington, her press secretary Dion Shields hadn't slept. She had been filtering media requests, monitoring safety alerts, and fielding back-channel contacts from major networks, all while preparing for what could come next. "CNN wants a sit-down," Dion murmured from behind her laptop. "Skip it," Jasmine replied. "New York Times wants a comment." "Nope." Even Colbert's team reached out. "I'm not doing comedy right now." Her tone was calm but decisive. Crockett wasn't chasing a headline. She was preparing to hold the ground she hadn't asked for, but would not surrender. Across town, Melania Trump's office stayed quiet. No clarifications, no walkbacks, no spin. Her aides reportedly believed silence was the high road. But in the court of public perception, silence had its own weight, and it only got heavier when a small but significant detail leaked. Riley Sharp, an executive producer at WNYT, had begun his own quiet review after the incident. What he found wasn't explosive, but it was revealing. In a pre-show seating chart circulated via internal email, there was a note from Melania's team: "If possible, do not seat next to Representative Crockett." It wasn't enforced, it wasn't public, but it was real. That single line added fuel to a story already burning with symbolism. Now, viewers weren't just debating what was said. They were asking what was planned. But even as the internet spiraled, Jasmine remained still. She didn't post again. She didn't book interviews. Instead, she wrote. That afternoon, she drafted a letter, not to Melania, not to the press, but to the people who had put her in office. It was brief, honest, and handwritten. "I was elected to speak truth, not to whisper behind cameras. I will not change that because of power or position. If that's loud, then so be it." The scanned letter was uploaded to her official account. Within minutes, it was everywhere, not because it was sensational, but because it was steady. In Sacramento, a grandmother printed it and pinned it beside her kitchen calendar. In a high school in Toledo, a student read it aloud during homeroom. In a church basement in Atlanta, it opened a community discussion on voice and visibility. The letter didn't answer every question, but it made one thing clear: Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing politics. She was reclaiming her narrative. Meanwhile, in a newsroom, 2 states away, Angela Russo, whose late-night decision to leak the audio had changed the national conversation, was facing her own storm. She hadn't planned to be the story. Her job was technical, not editorial. Her editing bay was in the back behind a vending machine and a flickering fluorescent bulb. But when she heard Melania's whisper, something shifted. She had grown up watching powerful people say one thing publicly and another behind closed doors. Her mother had been passed over for a raise 3 times, always with polite explanations. Angela knew that tone, that just between us tone. And so she clipped it, subtitled it, sent it to one friend, and the rest unraveled from there. Now she was under review. No names had been called out, but a mandatory staff meeting had made it clear someone had violated protocol. Someone had broken the chain. Angela sat quietly in the back as her supervisor said, "This network does not leak." But in her pocket was a text from an unknown number. "Respect what you did. Don't talk to press. Don't trust the silence." She didn't respond, but she didn't delete the clip either, because Angela understood what so many others had now seen. This wasn't just about what was said. It was about who felt entitled to say it and who was expected to stay silent. And for Jasmine Crockett, silence was never an option. The frenzy didn't die down. It metastasized. Every hour brought a new headline, a new angle, a new debate. Conservative talk radio reframed the exchange as a respectful warning. Liberal podcasts called it a veiled threat. Social media turned it into a theater of metaphors. 2, women 2, archetypes 1, moment of accidental truth. But beneath the noise, something deeper stirred. In Washington, staffers began whispering about a previously unreported fundraiser from the year before, Naples, Florida, a private invite-only event held at a beachfront estate owned by one of the Southeast's most influential donors. There were no press, no recordings, just polished silver, circulating servers, and discreet conversation. That night, Jasmine Crockett had only been in Congress a few months. She hadn't even planned to attend until her chief of staff insisted. "The room will be thick with power," he said. "You need to be seen." So she went. With a teal blazer, a practiced pitch for community health clinics, and every intention of making connections. What she hadn't expected was Melania Trump. The First Lady rarely appeared without her official press corps, but on that night she arrived with only 2 aides. Her entrance silenced the room. They didn't speak until dessert, when both women ended up near the same marble bar. Jasmine had said hello first. Polite, measured. Melania had nodded. Congresswoman. Then Jasmine mentioned her district's uninsured rate, her hopes of courting donors for clinic expansions. Melania had replied softly, "That is your work? Yes. Health clinics." Jasmine remembered the phrasing. Not important work, not good work, your work. "I believe in solving real problems," Jasmine had said. Melania smiled faintly. Some people smile, some people shout. It does not mean one is more sincere. Then the final line. "If you plan to build influence, maybe you learn which tone the room prefers." Jasmine hadn't replied that night. She'd simply walked away. But she remembered every word, and when she saw Melania's name on the WNYT panel lineup months later, something in her activated. Not fear, not anger, just precision. That's why, when the whisper came during the commercial break, "You should be careful who you call out." Jasmine didn't react in surprise. She reacted like someone finishing a conversation, because in her mind that conversation had never ended. And now the rest of the country was hearing the second half. In private, the White House tried to downplay the story. Internally, staff referred to it as a viral misfire. But something wasn't adding up. Melania hadn't spoken accidentally. She had leaned in, delivered a line, with timing, with control. It didn't look careless, it looked composed. That's what Riley Sharp, the WNYT executive producer, noticed too. He went back through the production archive, cross-checked emails, and found more than just the seating preference. Melania's team had brought up Jasmine's name months prior, quietly, repeatedly. Not in attacks, but in questions. Is she too combative? Does her tone help discourse? Why does she make everything a confrontation? The remarks were soft, almost administrative, but they seeded doubt in just the right places, and someone had taken notice. Jasmine Crockett wasn't paranoid. She was targeted just indirectly enough to make it deniable. That's why after the mic moment went viral, the response from her office wasn't loud. It was strategic. No call-outs, no media blitz. Just a controlled release of clarity. And Jasmine's power grew, not because she reacted, but because she resisted reaction. Instead of rage, she offered reflection. Her next move came not in a tweet, but in an op-ed. Published by The Charlotte Standard, the piece bore a simple but haunting title, "Words in the Dark Still Have Power." She didn't mention Melania. She didn't need to. "I've learned that what's whispered in comfort often echoes louder than what's shouted in anger," she wrote. The question is not whether someone meant harm, but why they felt they could say it to begin with. The essay detonated on arrival. Editorial boards cited it. Talk shows dissected it. College professors assigned it in rhetoric classes. But most important were the people who saw themselves in it, not the politically loud, but the quietly dismissed. Crockett had tapped into something rarely addressed in national dialogue, that the most powerful speech often isn't made in a press conference, it's what's said when no one's supposed to hear it. And sometimes that's where the real politics live. By the time the national conversation reached its boiling point, Jasmine Crockett had already stepped out of the spotlight and into her district. While pundits dissected her every word, she returned to the streets of Arlington. Her message hadn't changed, but her presence had deepened. She wasn't there for a media victory lap. She was walking into churches, clinics, and classrooms, reminding her constituents why she'd earned their trust in the first place. And yet, behind the scenes, the story was evolving. New threads emerged, quiet ones. A second source from the Naples fundraiser came forward, confirming that Melania's remark that night, "Learn which tone the room prefers," hadn't been casual. It was intentional, directed, the first half of the whisper America would later hear, and that changed everything. What had initially seemed like a spontaneous clash of styles was now being re-examined as a long arc of subtle confrontation, a cold war of tone, posture, and presence that had finally erupted accidentally on live television. But the question that kept returning wasn't about who said what. It was about who was allowed to say anything at all. And then came the second collision, an invitation, delivered quietly, seemingly routine, but it landed like a flare. The Harrington Foundation, a private nonpartisan institution known for its exclusive political retreats, had announced its annual dinner in Dallas. The guest list, hand-picked. 40 names, no cameras, no press, no record. Melania Trump had attended twice before. Jasmine Crockett had never been invited, until now. The choice wasn't random, it was a test, a message, and maybe a chance. Crockett didn't hesitate. She accepted. No entourage, no team. Just her. Dressed in a dark green dress and low heels, she arrived early, sat with quiet poise. Her presence did not announce itself, but it was unmistakable. Melania arrived 20 minutes later in a champagne blouse and neutral heels. Her demeanor was as polished as ever, cool, measured, unreadable. They were seated 2 tables apart. Just enough distance to maintain civility. Just close enough for tension to linger. Dinner was served, polite conversation, small laughter. The keynote speaker gave a gracious talk about restoring national unity. But unity was not what the room was watching. It was watching the corridor, the one near the restrooms. And that's where the final exchange happened. Jasmine stood first, quietly. She stepped away from the table. Moments later, Melania followed. The hallway was dim. The only light came from vintage sconces above framed photos of past honorees. Melania spoke first. "You wrote very beautifully," she said, her voice soft, lacking bite. Jasmine turned expression neutral. "Thank you." A pause. "You believe I threatened you?" Melania said. "I believe," Jasmine replied. "You said what you meant." Melania nodded slowly. "I meant to say, be cautious. This is a dangerous space. Words have power." Jasmine stepped closer, not to confront, but to close the gap of truth. "And yet your words came when the cameras were off. That's the part that matters." Melania's tone changed, softer, but not surrendering. "You don't know what it's like to have every move judged, every sentence twisted." Jasmine exhaled, a tired, knowing breath. "I do. The only difference is I've never had the privilege of being misunderstood as grace." And for the first time, Melania didn't deflect. She didn't polish the moment. She paused. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "Then you meant it," Jasmine replied. Silence. Then something no one could have predicted. "I admire you," Melania said. Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "That's not the word I expected." "I admire what I can't do," Melania continued. "You speak without fear. I was taught to survive through silence." Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't soften. But something in her shifted. "I'm not fearless," she said. "I've just learned that silence doesn't protect people like me." And with that, the space between them dissolved, not into peace, not into friendship, but into recognition. They stood still. No handshake, no hug. Just a moment suspended between 2 very different kinds of power. Then Melania turned and walked back into the ballroom. Jasmine followed 1 minute later. Neither addressed the moment publicly. No statements, no leaks, just a silence that, for the first time, felt mutual. And yet, the world outside buzzed with speculation. Did they talk? Did they fight? Was there a confrontation? Only 2 people knew the truth, but in the hours that followed, the question changed from what was said to why it mattered. Because this was never just about a hot mic. It was about how power speaks when it believes it won't be heard, and how voice can be reclaimed not with volume, but with clarity. Weeks passed. The headlines moved on. The world has always redirected its attention toward the next scandal, the next election cycle, the next name to trend. But something lingered. Not in the news feeds, but in the conversations behind them, because that clip never really faded. It resurfaced, quietly, repeatedly, referenced not just in political commentary, but in classroom sermons, roundtables, and trainings. Professors used Jasmine Crockett's op-ed in communication theory seminars. Community organizers quoted it during leadership retreats. Pastors paraphrased it from pulpits. "I will not change because of power or position." It wasn't just the words, it was the shift they represented. That a woman could stand still unshaken, not by shouting louder, but by refusing to shrink. Melania Trump, for her part, resumed her public schedule. School visits, literacy campaigns, art events. Her press team remained steadfastly silent on the hot mic incident. And yet, according to anonymous staffers, she'd grown more cautious. Not regretful, not panicked, just measured. More eyes were watching now. She wasn't afraid, but she was aware. Because the world had heard something it wasn't supposed to. And in hearing it, they had seen something else, how much weight a single whisper could carry when it echoed through the right silence. Meanwhile, back in Texas, Jasmine Crockett didn't change her message. She didn't harden it. She didn't soften it. She sharpened it. Her next speech on the House floor was not about Melania. She didn't name names. She didn't mention microphones. But she ended with a single line that sent social media ablaze. "My voice may bother some, but I wasn't elected to whisper." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Not because it was loud, but because it was clear. That speech, though brief, was the final pivot. The conversation, long spun into chaos, had settled around one simple truth. This wasn't about a feud. It wasn't about a political stunt. It wasn't even about the tension between two public figures. It was about presence. Who gets to walk into a room without apology? Who is expected to modulate their tone just to be tolerated? Who can speak freely, and who must measure every word? And more importantly, what happens when someone refuses to shrink for the comfort of the room? The viral moment faded from the front pages, but not from the culture. Across barbershops and brunch tables, in group chats and graduation speeches, the phrase hot mic moment took on new meaning. It became a shorthand for exposure for those moments when the truth slips past, Polish pass protocol, and lands exactly where it wasn't supposed to. Angela Russo, the editor who clipped the audio, quietly resigned a month later. She never admitted she leaked the file. She didn't have to. In a pseudonymous blog post buried beneath layers of anonymity, she wrote, "Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let people hear each other. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to, because the work had already been done. The whisper had traveled, not as gossip, not as scandal, as proof. Proof that what is said behind closed doors still matters. That civility isn't defined by tone, but by intention. That the weight of a sentence isn't measured in decibels, but in consequence. And maybe most of all, that clarity, not volume, is what scares people the most. Because clarity can't be spun. And when someone speaks it without apology, without armor, without whispering it, leaves a mark, not a headline, a legacy." In Glendale, Arizona, two retired teachers debated whether Melania's whisper was maternal or manipulative. In Omaha, Nebraska, a civics teacher built a curriculum unit around Crockett's response. In Harlem, a teenage girl recited Jasmine's op-ed at a student council election and won in a landslide. Because the truth is, we've all heard that voice, the one that tells us to dial it back, to make ourselves smaller, softer, less of a problem. And we've all had a choice, to obey it, or to stand up and say clearly, "I heard that." And I'm not going to let it slide. That was Jasmine Crockett's real victory. Not in the headlines, not in the tweets, not even in the ratings spike, but in the shift, the awareness, the sudden undeniable clarity that even in the most curated spaces someone is listening, and someone is refusing to be silent, because power, when left unchecked, will always try to preserve itself in quiet tones. But voice rewrites the room, and this time, it didn't ask for permission.